Thanks for coming. There's a big crowd today. I want to welcome back to Pivotal Cooper. We have Tim, Lane, and Alan, also David over here. The illustrious Cooper, design firm, who's here to talk about, or hold a Q&A session with us about integrating design and agile development methods. So I'll hand it over to these guys.
Thank you very much. I can kind of hear my mic. Can you guys hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Hi. Hello. So, thank you very much for having us. We're really delighted to be here. We have visited Pivotal a little bit and sat with a couple of teams here, so we have a general sense of how things work. But we're very interested in learning more. And if after this meeting, any of you want to follow up with us and have further conversations or let us look over your shoulder and observe what you're doing, we'd love to do that because we want to keep talking. So we're here today to continue the dialogue about design and agile. Do they fit together? How do they fit together? It seems like in a lot of senses we have a lot of shared values. We're both really interested in figuring out what it is that people value and delivering to them the things that they want in ways that they understand. And we both really have this same shared base of wanting to create products that people love and they're tremendously successful. However, we've noticed that there seems to be some misunderstanding or some poor communication between the communities where some people involved in user experience are having a little trouble interacting with their colleagues on the development side, and some people on the development side have some misunderstandings about what it is that user experience or interaction design can add to their projects. So we're really here just sort of hands across the aisle to have a good conversation about what it is that you guys need and how we can all work together better. So in the spirit of being agile, we haven't really brought a canned presentation. We're not here to lecture to you or anything. What we'd really like to do is we'd like you to think about, in the topic of design, user experience, and agile, what do you really want to know? What do you want to know about how designers think or work? What do you want to know about how design fits into your process, how to smooth out the bumps, how things can help? And a couple of topics that we have already heard you want to know about are how does design fit with weekly planning meetings? And that's the idea that Agile is an ongoing iterative process. How do you integrate design, which is largely about having a larger context and understanding of the whole system, fit in with something that's a moving train? And you want to talk about how designers and developers collaborate. There's a myth of the genius designer, someone who comes in with a brilliant idea and owns it, is resistant, throws the design over the wall. We want to break that down. We want to stop that stereotype. We want design to be a collaborative process. And we also want to talk about how can design be iterative? How can you have a concept of a clear product that is developed over time and changes as you encounter reality? So there's cards on the table, there's some pens. I'll give Alan and Tim a couple of moments to introduce themselves. I'll talk a little bit about Cooper, but while we're talking, I encourage you to start thinking about your questions and write them down on cards so you can hand them forward. So I wanted to just say a few words about Cooper. We are an interaction design company. We specialize in the design and ideation around digital products. Products contain a digital component, but that extends into devices and services and websites and packaged products. Mr. Cooper here has written a couple of books on the subject. One is kind of a principles and patterns book that is called About Face, Principles of Interface Design or Interaction Design, depending on what edition you're reading. And then also a business book called The Inmates Are Running the Asylum. And we as a company have been struggling for years to try to figure out how to better engage with business. Is it better to approach management to get permission to do design? Is it better to work more closely with developers who are actually building things to engage in design? And we're kind of coming to the conclusion that the Agilistas are our partners, really. We've become a lot more interested in the Agile community, attended some Agile events, been doing a lot of research and site visits, really trying to figure out how we can blend our methodologies and all work together more productively. So I just wanted to let Tim and Alan introduce themselves, and then we'll start collecting questions. Tim?
So I'm Tim McCoy. I've been an interaction designer at Cooper for about 5 years. Prior to that, I started out actually in the 95 as a web developer. And so my general track is that I started in the development organization and kind of saw where my interests were lying more in the experience that users were having with my products. I moved more and more into the design of the front-end experience, and then, coming into Cooper, even more so into the entire package of the services and the way that the business needs and the development needs all affect the way that design can affect each of those organizations. And so I've just seen a lot of the pains that Lane referenced in the beginning. Where do we come in? Where do we start? And I think that, to echo Lane, I'm seeing a lot of that as well, that the development organization is really the spot where we need to be focused on figuring out how to make our relationship the best we can, because that's really what gets good products out there.
Yeah. No, I don't think it is.
Yeah.
Or is it?
It's
Okay.
just into the camera. There's
Okay,
no
good.
speakers live right now.
Well, my name is Alan Cooper, and I have had an identity crisis for the last 35 years. I don't really know what it is I do, but I like to create things, and software is the perfect creation medium. And I kind of got seduced into the world of software by its wonderful plasticity and shapeableness. And I built a lot of software in the 70s on the first microcomputers. I had a dozen products out in the marketplace for personal computers before the first Mac was introduced. So I got a lot of miles on me. I then, kind of moved my business from, inventing and marketing and selling everything to just kind of inventing and selling it to other vendors. And I built a lot of software for companies like CA and Microsoft. And I've been a real dilettante in my interests in software. I've done visual programming languages and business software and some even little game software and just all kinds of stuff. And it's that of course makes you equipped to be a consultant. And sometime in the early 90s, as the industry was really starting to bulk up, I still wanted to focus purely on the creative side of things. I kind of let go of the construction side and started focusing on the design side. And out of that was born this company. Was for several years called Cooper Interaction Design. We kind of broadened our focus and changed the name just to Cooper. I asked my brother-in-law, the high-tech advertising guy in the mid-90s, I said, well, what should I call this? And he said, I said, how should I describe myself? And he said, how about too old to code, too young to die? And it's actually, in many ways, I think programming at a commercial level really is a tough road for an older guy. It really takes the stamina of a young person to do it. On the other hand, I'm really excited about what Agile brings, because it kind of grounds out some of that hero programming thing, which I grew up in. I mean, I lived in that world. I called him the Picasso program. The guy went off by himself and says, "My vision. I'm going to do it. Get out of my way." And I was one of the guys who invented the Y2K bug. And so the thing about all good programmers, I've always said, is that they're not doctrinaire, is that they believe something fervently and deeply up until you show them a better way. And then they go, that's better. And those other beliefs, they're no good anymore. And they don't believe in something because they believe in it, but they believe in it because they have seen that it is right. And I have seen Agile. It's right, and it's the way that I used to build software in the 70s and the 80s. And so I've been kind of banging the drum at Cooper saying, we need to get with this. We need to get with this. We don't know how, but we're gonna figure it out. So that's why we're here. Thank you for having us.
So if we have any cards, we can start handing them forward, and we'll just start out on one of the topics that we have already, and we'll have some more cards to draw from. I think the first one I want to tackle is kind of question 3, which is a really good place to start, which is how can design be iterative? And I've been doing some research over the past year. I went to the Agile 08 conference up in Canada and met with a lot of people. And one thing I know about Agile is that there is no one true Agile. There are a series of shared beliefs and a series of shared techniques, but the way that the things that actually work for different companies depend a lot on your team and the composition of who's on the team and their skills, and also the kind of product that you're building and the complexity of that product. And so I think that as I'm saying things, if I say something you disagree with violently, talk to me later, because it probably means that you're coming from a perspective or environment that I just haven't met yet. And so nothing surprises me anymore about Agile, because lots of people are doing lots of things with varying degrees of success. So the first thing I want to say about design being iterative is a common frustration I hear coming from people in the Agile environment who have been working with designers at some level. They encounter a designer who is what I call a genius designer, someone who has a concept that they kind of throw over the wall. And sometimes this is perceived as kind of arbitrary or unworkable, and it's not a productive working environment. Another frustration that I hear is that designers sometimes come in and say, wait, stop the process. I need a whole lot of time to go do a lot of research and write a big document before I can even tell you anything. And that's also perceived as being sort of counter-agile and against the process. And I think that I could talk a little bit about our own practice and what it's like on the other side of the wall, if there is a wall, to sort of describe how interaction designers think and how some of those misconceptions happen. So a lot of what we do as interaction designers is founded on a really deeply rooted desire to understand how people think and what they value. And when Alan started working with personas many, many years ago, one of his sort of key insights came from being a developer and sitting there and having that classic developer problem, which is, gosh, what should this thing look like and what should it do? And one of his first and really most important insights, is kind of the apple on the top of the head, was, oh, I am not the user. I am not the user of this complicated business system I'm designing. So thinking about somebody who was not him was like the first insight. Designing for another person, having empathy for another person, is like a really core and key element of interaction design. And if you can do nothing else other than realize you're probably not the user of your product and having empathy for that person, you're going to go a long way towards doing a better job. Then the next thing, the next insight is, oh, maybe we should go talk to some people and understand what they want and how they think. And then you get into the world of, wow, everybody has a different opinion. How do I make sense of this? There's all these arbitrary, idiosyncratic individual people. So then the whole concept of personas came to play. Personas are a way of modeling all of this rich, idiosyncratic information in the world and forming actionable patterns that we can use to make decisions. And then building on that, there's the realization that these personas can be actors or characters in stories. Now, scenarios are what we use as interaction designers. User stories are a very important Agile concept. There's a relationship between them. But where the user story is a small, granular element that has to be small enough to be built and tested in a finite amount of time, a scenario is about a larger experience. I hear some people in the Agile environment calling these epics or narratives or big stories, or there's a big movement in the community right now to try to understand that interplay between the little teeny feature level user story and the larger story of the product, the successful experience of use. And then building on that, having an understanding of the user that's based on real research with real people and not just something we're making up, and then a story that describes the overall experience with the product, we then can extract a thing that we call user, or actually that we call the interface requirements, not the product requirements, not the features so much as what the product must do. And to sort of sync up languages, we're talking about what your user values. What do they value? How do they think? How do we show them information that they understand? So the process that we use, the thinking process that we use, is extremely iterative. We're talking about how do the different users want to see it, how can we present it to them, and then this is where our principles and patterns come to play. So now we have an idea of what's the objective of the product. Now we can start thinking about, well, how do we start solving those problems? And this can be a dialogue. So I've described all of this as being the work of the interaction designer, but I only do that because typically I haven't had the great pleasure of working really closely with a group of developers. If we do have an opportunity for interaction designers to work closely with developers, this becomes a very collaborative process where you have whatever level of understanding about your user you have. You know, maybe you've met some people, maybe you can talk about it, but what's important is that you identify clearly who the user is and you agree upon that. Then, based on that, you can start to build up an understanding of what they value and how to present them what they need. So we use a lot of sketching, we use a lot of whiteboard drawings to work through our ideas in a very lightweight way. And we can do that process as a separate, like, pre-iteration zero process, or we can do it more collaboratively in part of an early iteration. Let's look at some cards.
Could I
You wanna
I'd like to
build on
just
that? I'll look at
interject
these
something,
cards.
kind of a little background is where Cooper has found its sweet spot in the industry is with large companies, with big IT organizations, with largely insular, conventional development groups. And so a lot of what we do is by nature not collaborative. It's collaborative amongst ourselves, not so collaborative with the development organization, because the development organization is not open to collaboration. And so one of the themes that we've been banging on for many years is we need to work together, we need to work together, and it's largely fallen on deaf ears, and it's one of the reasons why we're so excited about the whole Agile movement, because what it looks like to us is a flower opening. You know, the community of people who build software are finally saying, let's work together, and we're going, are you talking to me? So it's very exciting. So a lot of our we're kind of go, well, everything we do is iterative. We're the pioneers of pair designing. We've been preaching within the design community that you need two people to do all of your design work, and we've established these roles of pairs. And all the design teams that we've put out in the world are always a core of two people. And so a lot of our thinking is very congruent with Agile think, but it's kind of had this strange wall that we're eagerly looking to tear down.
Tim has a couple questions.
Yep.
Let's
Yeah, there's a question here about getting early design ideas to developers and getting a quick turnaround on things. And so, you know, I think one of the things that, and to Alan's point, one of the things where I've noticed projects being very successful is when the development organization is involved early on in our engagements. Historically, what our projects tend to be is we get brought in by someone at a mid-level or higher to come in and kind of fix a product that's not getting to market, or someone's got an idea and they don't really have the bridge between the idea and the development organization to get the thing out to market. And so what we do is we have these really quite tight iterations. They're not as formalized as an Agile iteration, but essentially within we'll establish a schedule of a week, 2 weeks, and we'll have check-ins with all of the stakeholders. And that's both business stakeholders and development stakeholders. And at every point in the process, we're getting feedback on just where we're at. You know, like it's the same thing. Like stuff is very much half-baked a lot of the time. Never so half-baked, like, you wouldn't show a code you couldn't compile, right? The same idea, we wouldn't show an idea for a design that only went halfway through, or, but
like a rough sketch coming
exactly
into focus.
right. It's like you get this. Thank you very much. Instead of having to design something to a great deal of fidelity, the first thing we come up with in our first iteration will just be a story. We'll talk. Oh, yes, we talk to these folks, and we understand the problem. We talk to the business. We understand the business situation. We understand the technical situation. We understand the user situation. And here's an idea for how this thing can move forward. Okay, that's great. Oh, except that our business model doesn't allow for such and such. Okay, great. We'll go back to the drawing board. See you again in 4 days or whatever it is when we have our next meeting. And very quickly, the design gets down on paper, like literally on paper, whether it's a whiteboard or we have tablet PCs that we'll often use as just as a scratch paper substitute. And the designs go through these iterations in increasing levels of fidelity. And then there's another question here, which this dovetails into. How does the designer-engineer interaction move away from static tools and translations without losing productivity on each side? Right? So that's something that I think a lot of people struggle with for a long time. Is designers tend to speak in Photoshop, and developers tend to speak in code. And one of the things that I personally try to do, and that I've seen more successful than not, is to really move away from that high fidelity, right? It's not about the Photoshop. It's about getting just enough information transferred to the developer and to the business people, whoever it is that you need to share the idea with and have it take up space in their own thinking to get that across. So that might be just a whiteboard sketch in a meeting. It might be we use fireworks a lot of times for our interactive or our mock-ups of interactions. So we'll just draw several states of an interaction and play it back like a film strip. It might be actually, coding some quick and dirty web-based thing that gets the interaction point across, but doesn't look anything like it's supposed to. That's actually the other trick. Is one of the things that we're very serious about at Cooper is decoupling the visual design aspects of the interface from the interaction of the components of the interface. And so by doing that, you don't have to design the interaction in Photoshop. You can design it on the whiteboard. And then developers can take that level of information and start to put together the structure that's necessary to implement it. And then we overlay on top of that visual design, which is not just aesthetics, although that's a lot of it, but also the visual interaction design, the things that give visual cues that actually are part of the user experience, not just a skin on top, right?
So I think that the other thing I want to add to what Tim is saying is that I believe that the level of fidelity of your documentation is not the issue. It's kind of a red herring. What's important is the clarity of communication. And depending on the structure of your team and the complexity of the thing that you're designing, it's sometimes perfectly appropriate to sit down at a desk and have a conversation and knock it out in code. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky. There's a funny interaction that you might want to mock up and then test with some people before you actually build it out. Sometimes you might want to go through and create an entire navigational structure for something or an architecture for something and trial that and then build it. And the level of documentation about whether you're creating a prototype or a flash prototype or a paper prototype, or you're drawing sketches on the whiteboard, or you're creating notes or things like that, is all dependent on what's required to support the communication. The important thing is the communication, that people are all understanding the same thing and working on the same thing.
Yeah, I mean,
and the more rigid your communication is, the harder it is to iterate your documents as you go along.
Right.
And so we're moving away from having really large, brittle documents and moving to these more lighter weight sketches and prototypes and things like that are communication tools. They're not intended to be documents per se.
Yeah, there's kind of a counterforce to that too, though, and it's something that someone here mentioned. We can talk about design version control systems, and that's such a fascinating, crazy question. I totally am with it. But as you know, in the same breath that at times the right level of communication is sitting down in a conference room for an hour and hashing out some details about how data is going to work, or how, in whatever level of design we're talking about. There's also an opportunity and a necessity sometimes to have these kind of milestones and to have these markers for the business people more so than for the development organization itself, right? One of the things that, and I'm bringing this up as our current less than agile practice, and the ways I actually have seen some good parts of that are these milestone collections of thinking, right? It's like, in order to get something built, you need to know the direction you're headed. You need to know your target. And what we can do is to come together best we can and establish that target, right? And that can be in any level of fidelity that's appropriate. Sometimes it can just be a Word document that spells out, what this thing is going to need to accomplish to be successful. Other times it's a full-fledged, big, fat document that's got full-color pictures in it because the board of directors needs to see something that proves your worth, right? And so these things have a purpose. The trouble with them is that they don't always serve the purpose of actually getting the product built. And it's finding that balance, which is really difficult.
And the bigger the organization, the more you have to do that kind of organizational communication, which may not really be on the critical path of creating the best software. It's really an interesting thing that I've seen is that there's a kind of a software invention process that a lot of that startups do. They're inventing software, they're inventing products, and whereas bigger organizations tend not to invent, they tend to extend and develop and expand and bloat, and the invention process demands a higher rate of iteration. It demands more feedback, and it is often comes from the mind of one person who has a vision of what he or she is trying to accomplish, but all the details are kind of fuzzy, and an agile process can really tease that out. And in bigger organizations, you just don't see it that much. You're starting off with a known clientele and known set of goals, and so a lot of what we find ourselves tasked with doing is understanding and articulating what those known usage scenarios and those known user goals are to an organization that has gotten lost in their own forest. And so there are things that you can, well, I was going to say get away with, but that's really wrong. There are things that you need to do when you're starting ab initio from a blank slate that would just be jerking back and forth in a bigger organization, and vice versa. You don't have those communication problems in a small group that you do in a bigger organization. So I think it's important that you can tailor your what techniques you pull, what arrows you pull out of your quiver for any given client engagement.
Let me answer a few of the shorter questions here, and then we'll sort of go back to more philosophical things. There's a question here: do you treat design work as stories in themselves? And I've seen a couple of different approaches that seem to work very well. I've seen some companies actually have a very agile interaction design process. I'll mirror it so it goes the correct direction for you guys. A very agile design process that's a little staggered. And so they have a user experience track that has activities like research and sketching and storytelling and large thought about the overall user experience and testing. And then that's overlapping. So there's like a 2-week lead approximately where the user experience group is running a little head of each iteration. And that works very well. I've also seen a model where the interaction designer is actually more like a product manager and is kind of embedded in the team and is acting on an ongoing sort of daily basis consulting with people. I've also seen the user experience interaction designer person be someone on the team who is a coder, someone who has experience in front-end web development. And so it's possible that design work can have cards. Research can have cards. It can be all integrated into one queue. Or it's also possible that design activities can be slightly staggered. One of my favorite companies that has a really vibrant and successful blended user experience and agile practice, they actually have war room for the design for all the initiatives, and then they also have a separate card wall for development initiatives, and they're cross-populating the two groups. So this is one of those questions that it really depends on what you're doing, what you have in your group in terms of different people with different responsibilities, and how big and complicated the project is you're working on. There's a question here, structuring contracts to incentivize agile activity. I can't answer that one because I'm not sure how it relates to experience. If anybody else can identify, say more about this card, maybe I could answer it.
Yeah, so I just was curious to what kind of business arrangements you make with your clients that sort of incentivize agile activity or not disincentivize that. I think frequently when you work with a design firm, they'll scope out a web project and say, okay, there's 10 pages here, it's going to cost $150,000. And like from that point on, they don't necessarily have a good incentive to work closely and to iterate repeatedly and to react to issues that come up when designs are implemented.
Good question.
So I wanted your thoughts on that.
I think that the general point there is that Pivotal works with clients who have no designer.
Yes.
We use our internal designers who usually are people who love agile and very social interactions. And
Yes.
they're kind of with you guys on that front. But also we work with a lot of clients, especially in the New York office, who bring design firms in.
Right.
And have worked with them for 3 months already.
Right.
And they, they're more traditional and they're very, very resistant to any kind of back and forth, let alone,
I see.
Building
Right.
along with
Hero
them.
designer, genius designer.
Right.
This is the design, you will build our design.
Right, and when we say even like, when you tweak it a little bit, that's even like, wow,
Right.
we've delivered already, we've delivered,
Right.
Yeah, I've seen contracts, I've heard of contracts where it's actually in the contract, you get 3 revisions on this design, and
Right.
so anytime we talk to them, they would be considered one of those
Yeah.
revisions. So how do we get that kind of out of contract? How do we, I guess, convince, how do we create a contract that does it?
David, come up and take the mic. This is David Fore. He wasn't going to talk, but
right now.
speaking to the mic.
The short answer is that that's really baloney. I'm not saying that your experience is baloney, but this probably comes from designers who are used to working in atoms and graphic design and you know what I mean, that kind of thing. We believe that it's organic what's happening. It's organic in its ideation and in its construction, but also the thing that we're building together has its own life out there when it's being used, and particularly these days where we're really trying to be responsive to the views and activities of the humans that are actually trying to figure out the usefulness of what we're putting out there in front of them. It just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So I posit that
the
it's
short answer
silly.
the short answer is advocacy. It's really, if you're viewing your development organization as downstream of some other process, that's not agile to start with. I mean, the development organization, the whole point is we want to shift the dialogue from having, separate siloed organizations that are focused on some kind of dependencies on each other, and we want to have groups of people who are working collaboratively with a shared understanding to create great products. We want to change an industry. And so I think the best thing that we can do is educate and advocate. And that's a tough nut to crack. I think that we have to do a lot of education about how we can work better with people in order to get them to understand even what's possible.
I'd like to add one other thing about this.
Got a handful of cards?
Is
there?
that the dirty secret about how these design engagements get scoped, at least from Cooper's point of view, is that the product manager or the CTO or the VP comes to me, and I'm the head of consulting services at Cooper, and he says, oh, we have this design project, and we need to do this research, and we don't know who our users are, all that stuff that you would expect. But underlying it all is, and there's these guys down in the basement, and I hear this clitter, clatter, clatter, clitter. I think that they're developers, and they scare me. And I don't understand what they're doing. I don't understand what's in their heads, and they just they're just building stuff down there. Can you do something about that?
Oh, and we have X amount of money and no more.
That's right.
Yeah, and so part of what we're interested in doing here, not just in this moment, but overall, because we're just down the street, is to figure out how to answer this question in a better way. So ultimately, I'm going to want to turn that question back to you.
I think we're describing the same thing. You're Agile and you're in the design community. We're Agile and we're in the development community. And we have the opposite experience with the other counterparts.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a producer at a company, so I'm probably responsible for both sides, but I'm also trying to, of scoping something and defining what it is, because essentially what we're doing is we're selling our time. And that's one thing that's the same, whether it's a waterfall process or an agile process. We're just selling a chunk of time with, the associated resources. So to Lane's point about it being education and advocacy, I think a lot of the time it's actually in the client's interest to go with more of an agile process, because then it deals with the fact that there's not just 3 revisions. There's a certain amount of time that's required. But and so that's, I think, going to work well for many clients, which is like, yeah, you can keep, we can keep making it better. And if you change your mind, we can adjust. And it's cool because we have this much time. But what it requires from the clients that you guys probably know more about than I do is uber involvement from the clients.
That's exactly right, and that's one thing I didn't say.
So that's one of the challenges. Our clients, my main point of contact is usually, has less time than I do on a project to just really get something done. So
yeah. And then one of the first things I say to our really serious clients with really big problems is that when you hire Cooper, your problems have just started. We are a full-time problem for you, right? Yeah, and to dispense any fantasies that all of a sudden their workload is going to start going down.
Right.
Yeah.
Plus, when you leave and start off something.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
So,
Can I pile on for a second on the
But only if you
previous
come here
issue
and sit next to the
about designers? I already introduced you to my brother-in-law, the advertising guy, and I have a lot of designers in my family and my close personal friends, and I know this thing about designers is this is my design, and so I just want to say that one of the cornerstones upon which our organization is built is this idea that it's not about your design and it's not about my design, it's about the best design. And that's one of the reasons why we created this idea of the synthesizer and the generator. These are terms that we use internally, but basically it's the moral equivalent of pair programming. We do pair designing. And the reason why we do that is because you can't say, I want it to be blue and up in the upper left-hand corner, because the other guy says, why? Okay, and if you can't explain why, then it's not going that way, and it's not going to be blue. And there's a lot of design talent that came into our industry during the .com boom when we went from being from building software that ran on a client side and talked to a server to new media and marketing software that does direct business with people. And so that whole kind of world of advertising design came in. But to me, that's, if it has a role at all, it's a thin veneer on the core aspects of design, which are the design of behavior, which is, I think, is exactly equivalent to what programmers do. What programmers do is design. You're designing code. You're designing how you're going to build behavior from the computer out, and we're designing how you're going to build behavior from the user in. But I see them as very complementary design processes. But it can't be about, well, this, I like it this way. That's art. We don't do art.
So I have another one here titled Early Development Issues. For a brand new web app product, what, if anything, do developers need from designers to get started? And how do developers get started, or can or should they, if the business strategy isn't fully baked? I love this question. Thank you, whoever answered it, because I think that I'm an early student of Agile. I say I've been studying Agile less than a year, but it became increasingly apparent to me that Agile's lineage is as a development methodology. And many of its core techniques are how to make good, effective code. And I think what's been happening in the industry is people are realizing that the principles and vision of Agile can actually be applied beyond the development methodology to also be a product creation methodology. And the values of the way people communicate and work with each other in a development environment can be enlarged to also include other kinds of important stakeholders who also have other perspectives. Now, that said, I think that you can have a perfectly healthy Agile project with a failed product, because the things that Agile uses to measure its success are about velocity and robustness of code, and not necessarily the satisfaction. And to a certain extent, XP's lineage is that you make the customer walk along with you and say yes to every step. That doesn't guarantee you're going to have success. It just guarantees no one's going to blame you when you fail. And I really believe that there's this new upswelling of product managers who are also Agile. And there's this new concept coming around. I've heard it described in different ways, but the idea is that there is kind of a product identification process that happens in advance of the development process. And it is also an Agile process. And the idea is that before coding starts, someone has done some thinking about what is the business plan? Who is the audience? What do they value? How will we make money doing this? There's some kind of a sound business plan behind it. And there's some level of thinking at that level. Wouldn't that be great?
Not always a good assumption, right?
That I think that what we need to do is we need to realize that the practices of interaction design, the practices of user experience design are this beautiful bridge. Because here's a group of people who kind of talk both languages. Interaction designers can speak technical, we can speak business, we understand what users need and what users want. We're very good at creating visualizations of things that don't exist. We're very good at taking diverse, idiosyncratic research and turning it into actionable stories and artifacts. Whoa, what if you had people on your team who could help you make sure that you had a solid business plan before you started building something? Let me finish my rant and then I'll get to you. And what if there was somebody on the team who could reflect back to business stakeholders the coherent idea or the stupidity of their idea so that they understood it before we started building things? And then shifting over, having everyone working collaboratively to really understand what it is that we're building, what it looks like, how it behaves, and how we make it happen. Please go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to distill that a little bit.
Yes.
I think that what you see in the early literature
Yeah.
about Agile is that it's not about the code. We're trying to create business value. I think, which is exactly what you're saying. I'm not trying to be controversial or anything. I think what we've found over time is that the Agile customer doesn't know what they want.
Yes.
Right. So I'm just trying to distill that whole back down to a bit, which
Yes.
is we deal with customers all the time who want stuff blue in the top left corner. They can't explain why.
Yes.
Or it looks just like something else. They don't know how to express that.
Yes.
And I think that what we're doing as Agile is aging is, yes, pushing those principles up so that everybody's on the same page about
Right.
deciding what the business value is and then translating it down to where Agile started from, which is, okay, what are we as developers doing today?
Right. And the user experience community is filled with practitioners who are specialists at listening to all those idiosyncratic, face value, I want this feature, I want it to look like this, and really helping people come to clarity about the underlying goal, the underlying need, the underlying reason for why they're having this observation. And then giving clear direction, clear actionable direction to developers to help them interpret all of these conflicting and seemingly unprioritizable requests and bringing clarity to that. And we're really standing ready to help you guys solve that problem.
I want to say that
Can we let Aaron follow on and then you?
Yeah.
Aaron?
Sorry.
To sum it up, it seems like what you're trying to do is a systems thinking approach where Agile sometimes is just very focused on the software development and then like bringing in the right people to get the software development right and to go through that whole process. And like Lean expands on that, and like there are a lot of different kind of ways you can accomplish that, but it's just making sure the whole system is well thought out before you go and do any one thing.
It's not like anybody could design the whole thing before it exists, because reality happens. You discover things as you're coding it. You're discovering things as you show it to people. All we're trying to do is have a clear shared plan. We're not promising that's the right clear shared plan, but we have a clear shared plan. And then we're modifying that as we're all going through it together. So, Alan, do you remember what you wanted to say?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to the guy with the great haircut in the back. I really think, yeah, that's the way to go. I think you really put your finger on a key point about how Agile wants to create a good product. I would like to highlight, being as I'm an old graybeard and I've been in the software business for a long, long time, that is new and revolutionary. And that the main zeitgeist of the programming community has always been, you don't understand what I do, it's too hard, you're giving me these alien orders, and if you would just go away, I will create something good. And that, of course, has turned out not to work. And even the programming community began to smell a rat. And so I think that the extreme programming movement was a first step that kind of said, well, if we could just, get the people who are giving us these alien orders to walk a mile in our shoes, they would see how it's a lose-lose situation. And I'm kind of have some notoriety for having gone toe-to-toe with Kent Beck over this issue, because I saw extreme programming as not being a quest towards quality, but a quest towards a defensive stance. But the wonderful thing about Agile is not so much the techniques that it brings, although it brings fine techniques, but it brings an attitudinal shift that says, as an Agile programmer, my goal is not to defend my work. That's not the point. It's, as an Agile programmer, my goal is to take personal responsibility for making sure that this is a good product. And the reason why this makes me so happy is because I've believed for years that the programmer's best friend should be the interaction designer. And if the programmer takes that personal responsibility to create a good product, they immediately look around and say, where are the skills that I lack? How do I buttress my weaknesses? How do I fill in the gaps? And that should be the role of the interaction designer we can help interpret all that user garbage the same way that you can help interpret all that SQL garbage and move together. So it's unique. And I think there are a lot of guys who call themselves Agile who are still kind of playing the defensive game and not playing the it's about good product game. But I believe that we will crush them.
Let's take two more quick ones over
Yeah.
here. I want to try to get as much
Yeah,
coverage
this is a
as
good
we can.
dovetail one too. Questions about getting developer buy-in on design, on getting designers and developers to the table together, essentially. And then a really good thing here: designers and developers have different standards for judging success and high-quality work. How do we maintain innovative, high-level visual design when the aesthetics are de-emphasized?
Wow.
A lot of the answer to the question too is just kind of perseverance, right? A lot of it also is really doing everything as designers, doing everything that we can to work within the sandbox that the developer's playing in, to do things like produce appropriate assets so that they can just drop stuff into their designs and don't have to spend time being production people. And even more so, to step back to get to developers how to get them into the design. It really goes back to this notion of when developers is their goal to provide good product, to produce a good end product. And they see that that's also the interaction designer's goals. And the interaction designer, through these stories and through this iteration, through this collaboration, can start to demonstrate that, oh yeah, actually that, I knew this was a problem. There's this hairy thing where we have to get all this stuff out of the database, translate it to something else, move it over to here, let her save it somewhere else, and then come back to it in a week. And that solution that I just saw in that meeting was really compelling. Right? It's like, and they can understand, all right, there's a pathway here. There's someone else who understands and is trying to do what I'm trying to do, and they're going to give me the tools that I need to then, have a target and go and create this thing. And it's about listening as well, right? And about being able to have that design meeting where you introduce the 6-step process that gets her data through the thing and then there and back in a week. And to have the developer say, well, yeah, we could do that, except our database isn't fast enough, and this and that and the other thing. And to be able to take that into account, and whether it's right there in the meeting or whether it's the next day or whatnot, to come back with an iteration that takes that into account. And maybe it's an iteration that doesn't really take it into account, but it is such an important factor in the success of the experience that it's something that everyone can ultimately agree, okay, that's worth the extra effort, that's worth the extra expense or whatever it is. And so taking all that and bringing it back to the high standards, it's really about recognizing that we each have high standards in our own respective areas, and to kind of a little bit, it is a bit of a give and take where as a designer, I might have to back off a little of my high standards for the way a particular flow is going to work because of the complexity of implementing it that way. And then I expect in return the developer is going to back off a little bit on his or her stance on the value of spending the extra time or effort to do something that's going to provide the next level of experience.
As I was saying in the beginning, a very important part of our practice is that as designers, we must be able to justify every decision we make. And we justify that on our understanding of real human needs that's based on research, having observed real humans. And I think that the trick is the way you engage people in supporting a design decision or a visual design decision is by understanding what's the objective you're trying to support. If something is a certain color, why is it a certain color? If something's in a certain area, why is it in a certain area? So that if that's impractical, you can then say, well, the objective we're trying to accomplish is, this is the most important thing on the page, and therefore we need to put it in a prominent place. or this is something that isn't used as often, so therefore it doesn't need to be featured as prominently. Or we're trying to make a business application, having it be red and flashing isn't appropriate for a business application. And so by having the rationale and having a conversation based on the need or the rationale and not on the end result permits you to have a more collaborative and consensus-based approach rather than an arbitrary approach.
Mm-hmm. And you know, there's another part of this question too about you know, how do you really kind of get developers into the empathy of for the users and do that in a way that's quick and valuable use of time. I think, in my experience, the really core answer to that is there's only so much. I mean, at the end of the day, most of the developers I've worked with, their primary concern is not the user. Their primary concern is accomplishing their own job of getting the code working and of getting the feature set completed. And so what I try to do is connect enough on a level and bring forward enough stories and enough rationale for who the target users are and what their needs are without trying to make it like really heavy-handed. You know, like it's really bad form actually to kind of go into a development hive and, you know, say something's bad because Judy wouldn't want it that way. You know, it's like at the end of the day, it's when you're building the thing line by line, it's not about Judy. It's about all the other huge things that go into it. And so that empathy for the users is it lies beneath everything, but it shouldn't always be the primary focus. At least in a verbal way. You know, it is the focus in what you're trying to achieve, but not necessarily in the communication day to day about it.
So we're losing people. We should
yeah, we have about
have
10 minutes.
last question.
Okay.
There's this question here for Alan about inmates, and I think that's a pretty good place to wrap. So we'll just finish this up, and then we can turn off the video.
But we're happy to hang out.
Yeah, we'll hang out and chat.
You know, and talk some more.
Just
This is a nice question. It says, in the spirit of inmates, while there seems to be great potential in having designers pair with developers, how would you avoid the trap of the developer over limiting the product's potential? That's a really curious question. I believe that I think you said something about this earlier about scared business people. I've long said that there are two kinds of business executives: those who are software engineers and those that are terrified of software engineers. And because the software engineers have a way of communicating and thinking and relating to each other that's kind of different from the business way of communicating. And I think that I think that business people in general are, because the whole process of getting software built looks to them like a really incredibly expensive black box. And historically, they've seen these black boxes. Sometimes they're big and expensive, sometimes they're small and inexpensive, sometimes they're a success, sometimes they're a huge success, and most often they're a failure. And there doesn't appear to be any correlation between the money they put into the black box and the success, the percentage likelihood of a success they get out of it. So it's like if you can buy a lottery ticket for $1 or you can buy a lottery ticket for $100 and it's the same lottery ticket, well, you'd be a fool not to buy the $1 lottery ticket. And I kind of have a feeling that this is the mindset that most business people bring to the whole software construction game. So it's like, let's squeeze the builders, let's squeeze the programmers because, well, why not? I mean, it's not going to necessarily hurt our chances of success. So I believe that historically, all commercial software development has been underfunded, all right, under-resourced. You never have enough time, you never have enough people, you never have enough money, you never have enough support from contact with the users or, you know, expertise in management. Whenever you have, it turns out that somebody's computer blew up, it always takes 2 weeks to get it replaced, that kind of thing. And I think that the programming community over the years has hunkered down, and they've internalized these kind of defensive mechanisms against the guy who comes in and says, you know, I sat next to this guy on the plane back from New York, and his is up in the upper left-hand corner and it's blue, so ours has to be that way too. And so I think people who are left holding the bag, i.e. us, we get defensive about it. And I think that any dictatorship, any sort of fascist country or organization has always learned that you put enough pressure, they fight between themselves, and they leave you alone, and you can hang out at the palace. And I think that that's one of the reasons why the world of programmers and the world of designers have kind of been at each other's throats over this stuff. And so from a lot of designers feel like the programmers are sandbagging, and a lot of programmers feel like the designers are sandbagging. And again, this goes right back to this idea that what Agile does is it says, we're not here to cut code. We're here to cut the right code, which means that we're gonna work together. I've been, stumping for the last 5 or 6 years on this idea that I call the triad, and it's a way of organizing software development organizations. And it was a vision that I've had about doing engineering and programming as 2 separate things. And I kind of think that it's an idea that has not taken root, and I kind of want to let go of it. But I believe that the reason why I advocated it was because I saw it as a way to pull the programming community out from under this unreasonable pressure they get put on by people who don't understand how software gets built and what's important in it. And when they were out from under that unreasonable pressure, they would immediately see that there would be a useful place for interaction design in the software development cycle. And so it was very much, it was very pleasing to me to see that Agile is accomplishing that same goal as the triad. And I'm not, I don't think people, and this is to me, this is the beating heart of how programmers and real designers work, is I had an idea that was trying to accomplish something. It turned out that what I wanted to accomplish was right. The way I wanted to accomplish it was wrong, and I'm very, very satisfied and happy with that. And that's, to me, is how programmers are, and is how really good designers are. And so I think this over-limiting potential comes only from that world of where programmers are oppressed, and there are many, many, many organizations out there where the programmers live lives of quiet desperation, and so I think Agile is a way to liberate them.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah.
We appreciate your patience and time. This is the beginning of a conversation. We're happy to come back and continue it at any point.